Welcome to the Teens Talk podcast, created by the Student Virtual Board of Youth Celebrate Diversity. YCD supports teachers and students organizing locally, educating themselves and their peers, and taking action for inclusion and social justice. For more information, please visit ycdiversity.org. Welcome back to the podcast. For episode 8, we're diving into a conversation about identity, heritage, and the immigrant experience. I'll be chatting with 3 insightful students about what it means to be first and second generation Americans.
Hi, hello. My name is Jaji Jawara. I'm 20 and I'm a sophomore in college studying mechanical engineering with a minor in math. And I'm originally from Mali in West Africa.
I'm Serena. I'm 15 and I'm a sophomore in high school in New Jersey. I'm half Vietnamese on my dad's side, and then I'm half Indian on my mom's side. So I'm a second generation American.
Hello, I'm Tori of Victoria. I'm 18 and I live in New Mexico. I am a Mexican American, half Mexican and half Spanish, and I'm a political activist during my free time.
That's so awesome. I'm so glad just to have such a diverse range of young people here. I'll introduce myself. Hello, I'm Leila. I'm 20 years old. I use she, her pronouns from Denver, Colorado. And for me, I am first gen because I wasn't born in this country, but I have what I'd consider to be closer to a second gen American experience because I am adopted. We can get more into that. So let's go into the first kind of official question. And what does the term first or second generation American mean to you?
So I feel like it's a continuation of the struggle of the women in my family to access better opportunities and better education. In a different country, my grandmother didn't go to school and my mom had the chance to go to school, but she didn't have the chance to pursue as much education as I'm pursuing right now. I'm the first one in my family to go to college, and I'm the first one in my family to be living in America and going to college. So it means like a continuation of the dream of my family in some sense. And it looks to me like a lot of, fight, struggle sometimes, but a different experience that helps me feel a little bit outside of the box and stepping into new places where my family didn't specifically have the chance to step in. So new opportunities, meeting new people, getting to learn a different culture and becoming a different and better version of myself.
I can definitely talk better on like the second generation definition and what it means to me specifically. And I think it is like following into like the wants of your parents, going to college, getting education, getting a job, like actually fulfilling what they've made for you and the life they put ahead for you by giving you opportunities that they might not have had.
Yeah, I really agree with Tori on that. I feel like my experiences have been very similar because my parents and my grandparents, they worked really hard to immigrate to this country and to, in a way, make me and make my parents more American. So I think that like being second generation American, it's a continuation of that, of assimilating, but also like keeping the parts of your culture that matter very much.
That's very great. And I can speak on kind of understanding that partially. For me, I feel like I am a bit different in the second generation term because coming here, I have my dad who's South African, my mom whose family has been here for a long time. And I hear like my dad, he's very hardworking and kind of talks about the US, but he's not as open about that. Or my mom doesn't necessarily share the same perspective, I think, of like working very hard to come to this country because she was already here. Kind of going into the next question about what this whole continuation of the story and heritage means. How connected do you personally feel to your family's country of origin?
Yeah. So, personally, I feel very connected to like my Indian side of my family, mainly because of like the network that I have around me. In the area I live in, there's a larger Indian community there and more of my Indian families there. But with my Vietnamese family, I have like little to no family, and there's also not many Vietnamese people where I live. So I think it's harder to feel connected to that side of my heritage when this other side of my heritage is so prevalent around me. And then my parents also, we don't really carry a lot of Vietnamese traditions with us. We carry more Indian traditions with us. So sometimes it's hard to consider me like both halves, me to consider my heritage both halves when one is like more 75% in a way. So it's just an interesting relationship between the two, and like who do I really consider? What do I really consider myself?
Um, so for me, I do feel very connected to my heritage to some extent. So while I live in New Mexico, it is a very Mexican heritage, indigenous inspiration that are like connected to each other. So you are able to experience things that are so like valuable to the Mexican experience, or specifically the Mexican American experience. But also because of where I live specifically in New Mexico, it is very non, I guess, apathetic to being Mexican or things like that. So you have to like kind of conceal that part of yourself when you're in public, when people are, being outwardly, you know, xenophobic and all these different things. Like that's something that you try to hide almost.
I personally feel very connected to my culture and my heritage a lot. I try to go to Africa as much as I can to see as many West African countries as I can. I eat a lot of African food, and on campus, I try to surround myself with being involved with the African People Association, and also by being the president of NAFSA, I get to, meet people who share the same experience as me. So I try to to stay as connected as I can.
Very good to hear. It's kind of theme of wanting to stay kind of with your roots and feel connected, but in different ways. And for me personally, I feel like my connection kind of comes like my family still celebrates some Chinese holidays. So sometimes I'll get to do like a Lunar New Year dinner, red envelopes. There's also this thing in the adoption community called like Gotcha Day, which is like a sweet little thing. I personally don't necessarily feel like connected as much to my birth country. I did a lot of like Chinese classes and stuff, but I never was like the best at picking up the language. But I do actually feel like I'm pretty connected to my dad's country of origin because I have such a large extended family in South Africa. I got to go over there a little bit more and kind of celebrate my family there and hear kind of about South Africa. And I felt kind of, I guess, more integrated and close. It's so cool whenever I see something that's South African. So I understand that kind of feeling of connection, if it comes in a different way. So kind of moving on from kind of us to more of like, I guess, maybe our family members' experiences. Have your family members shared any thoughts on their experiences kind of living in the United States or about the US?
So my mom came to the US pretty early on in her life, and she came during like right before the Chicano movement. And so there was a large push from school to like kind of forget about everything that you've learned from another country, forget your experience in another country. And so I know my mom struggled deeply with the education system, not really being complacent to what she had learned, what she had experienced from Mexico, but also, trying to keep that and feel comfortable in it. And to this day, like it is still hard for my mom to listen to Mexican music or Spanish music or anything like that because she feels like this forced removal from that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that context. That sounds really hard, kind of. And to clarify for any audience members at home who might know, could you talk a little bit about the Chicano movement, kind of what was happening in New Mexico back then?
Yeah, so the Chicano movement was started around the time, most directly in California, but it moved throughout the states, and especially in like Hispanic uh, diverse communities. And it was when schools and education tried to force people away from like Mexican or Hispanic cultures, not speaking Spanish, not wearing, gang related things, you know, things like lowrider cars even were like kind of frowned upon. And so a lot of people felt kind of taken away from their community and they fought back, which led to the Chicano movement, where a bunch of students kind of moved away from that and created a better diversity within education.
Yeah, thanks for giving that explainer there. Diaji, I know your parents, they haven't come to America, but did they have any thoughts about you coming as an international student?
Mm, they don't really, because I first came here as an exchange student back in high school. So I got to live with my American family for a year, which was kind of nice. So, and they also live like 2 hours away from me. So it's like my family kind of like the fact that I also have my American family to guide me and be here for me. And I learned a lot from them. They drove me to college, they visit me, they helped me get set in my dorms and everything. So I'll say maybe sometimes they feel uneasy because of the distance, and sometimes they worry about overworking myself. And but no, they didn't really have any worries. I was like, I'm gonna come to America for college, and at first they were like, "Are you sure? You sure you don't want to go to France or a different place, somewhere closer to home?" But I was like, "No, I'm coming here. I'm doing it." So yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking mainly about my dad's family because my dad, I mean, he immigrated also when he was really young, about like 5 years after the end of the Vietnam War, and him and his my whole family had to flee on boats, and they end up like traveling across the country to end up settling in Massachusetts, and I think that came with a lot of grief over leaving their country quite in like a violent manner, and they knew they could never go back because of the way that they were viewed as like political refugees. So my dad's family, they tried to assimilate the best they can, and I think a lot of that was by suppressing a lot of culture. My dad didn't end up learning a lot of customs and languages, and he also experienced a lot of racism in school. And I think that made him want to raise me and my brother a lot more like American, so we would fit in better and so we wouldn't have that experiences. Because so while he has a lot of the experiences of being raised like Vietnamese, now I don't, but I have the privilege of now like fitting in better. So I am very thankful for that because I have a lot of privilege that he didn't have.
Yeah, I've kind of been hearing this theme of kind of like sacrifice from the parents, but also kind of the idea of like greater opportunity and kind of doing a lot to be here and assimilation. And I can talk on my own experience because what happened in China, reason I came here and was put for adoption is that the government had the one child policy, which resulted in like a lot of families they're having basically the government would come in and like find them or kind of take their kids for having any more than one child. And there was kind of a male bias in the families there for economic reasons. So a lot of young like infant girls ended up being put up for adoption kind of in China as a result of that. And my family ended up adopting me and coming over to Colorado after hearing about that on the news a little bit. And I can also talk on my dad's own experience deciding to immigrate here was that he, I think, is a little bit of a different case because he really wanted to come here, I guess, for opportunities as well as because he found love in my mom at the time there. And I think he like it wasn't as big of a jump for him because he is like a white South African from like British heritage. So he was able to kind of be like he came understanding like his like English and kind of understanding like kind of something closer, I think, to American culture and hearing kind of a lot, getting kind of a traditional like standard education and having a bit of a higher living standard over there. So when he came to the US, it was for some other choices as well as additional opportunities because I think my family, my mom actually was originally, long story going, to stay in South Africa with him when they were together, but it was a little bit too dangerous and there was a lot going on over there. So they came back to the US and my dad was able to get his green card. So that was the whole kind of story there. My dad, I think he is pretty like assimilated, like he doesn't like stand out Like he feels like very much like well integrated, but he does have a like people always talk about him having like an accent, and people think he's like British sometimes. And I kind of have to explain like, oh yeah, it's a South African accent that you're hearing. So kind of moving on from this kind of about your family and parents and kind of what they experienced in the story of immigration. How did your own background, or if it did, as a first or second generation American, impact your sense of belonging in school? And do you feel like other people who are American born or whose families had been here for a long time had a different experience than you?
I'll say when I came in high school, I had a lot of issues um, integrating myself and feeling like I had a community and I was part of something. I used to go to class, sit alone, go to lunch, sit alone, and nobody would really talk to me, especially since English wasn't my first language and I was just getting started learning it. So I felt a big void, I'll say. And when I came to college, the first year was also like that. Like sometimes I go to class and there's no one that looks like me, speaks like me, dresses like me in my classes, especially in engineering and STEM related fields. It's very complicated seeing someone that looks like you or someone who might at least relate to your experience. So I feel like being an international student and coming from Mali all the way here made it a little bit hard for me I'll say at first, but then I started finding my people, talking to more people who could relate to me, and I met some people who were also interested in learning more about my culture and stuff. So right now my experience is feeling way better, I'll say. I have friends from different backgrounds and that feels good, I'll say.
For me, school has never really been like my strong suit. Like I'd much rather not if I could, but um there has always been like a kind of click with like if you're Hispanic or if you're white. And I could never really go to either. I didn't really feel comfortable in either because one was, talking about like, your experience as a white person in school and like how are your plans for the future when, you have all these privileges and opportunities. And as a Hispanic person, they would be talking about like their opportunities and things like that as, very outward Hispanic people. But I never felt comfortable, speaking Spanish or, just hanging out with either. And that was definitely a difficult thing that I had to adjust to, especially when I moved to like a different part of New Mexico and had to, kind of feel comfortable, integrating into all parts of my personality and community.
Yeah. Um, I think that in the way that I was raised, I do align more like more American with a lot of the people I'm around. But I think some of the there's very subtle differences in like some of my values and my customs, things that I don't even realize until I think about it very much. But yeah, and I think that especially comes across when in school. I'm in a very like white area, so it's often hard to find people with these same or even like similar values, partially because I am a mix of like Indian and Vietnamese, and a lot of the Indians that I'm around, even though I'm similar to them, they also have like very clear differences. So I think it's just hard, not even to find people who are like very like the same as you, just to find people with like similarities as you that you can connect with in that way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. It's just once again so cool to have people kind of from so many different groups talking about the same kind of experiences there in different ways. Kind of, I guess, with me in school, I do feel like the kind of appearance thing kind of feel looking and being like different than other people. People can kind of pick up on that, and it's harder to kind of like get into like a clique or fit yourself into the box and be like, oh, here's who I am, like come hang out with me, or here's what to expect about me. Because I feel like sometimes people don't know as much of what to expect out of you when you look different than them or from a different background than them. And for me in Denver, it's actually I went to a pretty diverse school district, so there actually was a lot of people from different backgrounds, but I wouldn't say like my background was in there. There was a lot of Hispanic and Latina representation. There was actually a fair amount of Native American representation, like African American students as well, and also kind of like people who are like the white kind of kids, and there are people who are also like mixed. And for me, there was also some like Asian representation. There isn't really that big. Like I'd say the Asian community in general, like counting all groups, is pretty small where I was in Denver. Only a few, and actually a lot of the other people I knew who were like Chinese and female were other adoptees like me. And I would always kind of have this thing like I didn't quite fit, and I think as well into the adoptee group because I think it's more common when you're adoptee actually to have like two parents who are American. I don't know if like the immigrant experience having immigrant parents is as common. So I always felt kind of like I wasn't quite neatly in that box as well because of my family's background. So I kind of felt like I had to make, yeah, like that whole experience of making my own group and finding my own place or being around people who just respected differences and want to learn about you and kind of grow with you over feel kind of like we're similar. Let's just hang out and connect. So yeah, it's really great to build those connections there. So the other question kind of going into it is this idea of perception. So did you ever feel like your background as a first or second generation American, did you ever feel like it really impacted how others saw you or shaped kind of how you saw yourself in your future?
Um, the way, sorry, the way I think of my future, I think is very, I consider my family and like my grandparents a lot more than I think some of the people around me do, mainly because of like the role that they had in getting me to the place that I am. It's not that I completely am disregarding my own like opinions about it, but seeing what they've been through to get me to this place and seeing and hearing about their experiences, it's given me a lot of insight about who I want to be, and it's made me really want to really consider them and like consider my community when I'm making these choices about my future. I don't necessarily view it as just a me thing, as just like it's just my future. I think I'm doing it for a lot of other people.
I totally agree with what Serena just said. Whatever I'm doing right now, I don't feel like I'm doing it only for myself, but I feel like I'm doing it for my family as well as my community. Because I feel like if I can make it and I can become like an example, I could help other people in my community also make it, and I could inspire other people in my community also to, dare dream and do whatever they should do to achieve their dreams. So I'll say my family has like a lot of expectations on me, and sometimes when people see me and just by seeing me, I'll say they also have like a pre-constructed idea of what I should be or what I am, or they have like those labels of, okay, she's from Africa, she's a Black woman, she's doing engineering, she's Muslim, okay. That, and most of the times those labels are really, really not nice, but I just know myself and I just try to do as much good as I can every day and try my best, to change the narrative. Everywhere I go, I just do my best so that they can have a better opinion, I'll say, and a better image of people that look like me, speak like me, or come from places like where I'm from.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to like the expectations that like are held over you when you're like trying to represent your community and your family. Like being a political activist, my work is kind of at the forefront of like what's happening in my community. And that's a lot, especially when there is a lot of racism and xenophobia, like more rampantly with immigrants and second generation, people, and having to live their experience, but also, have to deal with people saying that immigrants aren't good for the country and things like that. And so for me, being a political activist, especially with immigration, it feels like I'm putting people, or I'm not helping enough, or I'm not doing enough for my community when all these things are still being said. And it's definitely like the expectation that your family has, like, of doing the most you can for us, for you, for everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that insight with the question, for kind of saying it's not really about necessarily you. It's about kind of feeling connected to a community and representing not just, yeah, you, but your parents, your family, your heritage, and your background. So thanks for kind of bringing that up. And for me, that kind of touched on me because I kind of feel like I've had a bit of like an opposite challenge with like my background and heritage, where like because of my parents being white, I've been put in a lot of spaces where I've had to kind of fight a little bit for the perspectives of different people, or people like my dad. You know, he doesn't represent every single experience of being an immigrant. And there are certain advantages and disadvantages depending on your background, economic status, and where you come from, and if you're like a native English speaker as well, that go into that. So I understand kind of like, I feel like there is kind of like this association I've learned about pressure, kind of also coming from being from that, because it's a large burden to carry to have to represent, you know, like a group or your family, or really kind of do well for so you can pave the way for other people. And because of like my own background, I feel like I haven't felt as much of that as much, but I understand how other people feel that and how important that kind of experience is to who you are, I guess, and what you're trying to do there. And I was kind of wondering, following up on that, do you feel like there's kind of like a very positive thing as well about putting that kind of burden on yourself and taking that role?
I'll say sometimes I wish I was a little bit more selfish in my decisions, and I thought more about what I would like to do instead of what everybody expects me to do, or what I should do to make everybody have a better life and everything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had followed some other passions I had. But I know, for example, I wanted to be a writer when I was younger, but then as an immigrant, I cannot really afford, to take the gamble of becoming a writer, because what if it doesn't work out? What if I don't make it? I'm investing a lot of money, a lot of time, there was a lot of hope on me. So it's like, yeah, sometimes you cannot dare to try to make what makes you happy. And sometimes I wish I was a little bit more selfish on that.
Thank you for being so honest on that and sharing that experience.
Yeah, I can definitely like attest to wanting to be a little bit more selfish and like take time for yourself. But I also know that like the push is good. Like you're gonna make something of yourself. You're kind of forced to make something of yourself, and that can be a little bit more fulfilling, but also, to lose parts of yourself for that fulfillment is not as fulfilling, I guess. Like there's give and take, and it's very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of view like me doing it for my family. I still have family in India and in Vietnam who are trying to come over, and I kind of view it as not me as me like forging a relationship with them and like still maintaining those connections to my family over there and to my family like and to my family in America. It's like a way of maintaining that love and that connection. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so much about that kind of aspect of your identity and that feeling of connection. To kind of going on from that idea of like you having kind of a whole extension of your family, this one kind of goes back more to your own personal identity. Has it really been easy or difficult for you to express your feelings about like your own politics or identity or individuality with your family or others outside your family?
For me, it's definitely a lot easier with my mother because she is like also at the forefront of like politics in where we live. But with my grandparents, like it was very different, a different experience of talking to them about what I believe. And there's a lot of like ingrained problems that they learn throughout their life that I feel like newer generations can kind of fight with. And it's like a disconnect with this culture, like we want to have everything perfect and everything great and we're fine with how things are versus I don't really like this. And so it can be a little bit more difficult. But I think with like my mom being Gen X and me being Gen Z, it's a little bit easier to mend.
I'll say I don't really talk a lot about politics with my family, or I try to avoid sometimes telling them about how I feel about some stuff, like some issues in the community, because whenever you try, they'll be like, "Oh, she's Americanized. She thinks she knows better than us," like something like that. So I try to avoid talking about those kind of things with them. But also on campus, on and in my everyday life, sometimes I not only sometimes, but I talk a lot about what I believe in because I don't really care about the judgment others put on me outside of my family. Like I'm very vocal about a lot of issues that are going on in Africa and in the Middle East, and I'm not scared to voice my opinions on those.
I think in terms of talking with my parents and my family about politics, I think a lot of my family tends to like shy away from the complicated issues. I think in issues where it's easy for them to like easy for them to say a statement, it's easier for them to talk about it. So I think whenever I try to bring up my opinions on a more difficult topic, it feels like I'm like rocking the boat. And yeah, it's just more difficult to just bring it up and to have a conversation about it because it's very obvious that they're uncomfortable talking about it and that they don't really want me talking about it at all. But yeah, I think it's just like something that like it's a progression that you need to like nudge certain for me, I feel like I can like nudge certain people to a point where they can talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up this whole concept. I feel like there is very much also like the idea of like, is it also a generational gap as well, which is normal kind of for everyone to be different from like their parents and express different feelings and see the world in a different way. That's one of the great things about being young, in my opinion. I kind of wanted to go into a second part of this, and that when you say there's a generational gap, do you feel like there's also a little bit more to that kind of being from like an immigrant background or being a part of certain community, maybe some issues are not as well talked about, or there isn't as much education or comfort with certain things?
So like with my mom being more like connected to like her Mexican heritage and like having different views of like how governments are run and how like different the political system is versus like Mexico and America. Like it has some similarities, but it's not completely similar. And when she like came over and like dealt with something completely different, like it has changed her perspective on what the values of the US are versus other places. And so that's definitely changed her or nuanced her way of thinking for this. And that's definitely something that like is not similar with me, who has, lived in America my entire life, and have like a very set view on things, I guess.
Hey, Tori, that was a really great thought because I feel like I had like something similar from like my own perspective as well, like with my dad, like in getting to go over to South Africa and how if you have a parent who has kind of grown up or spent a significant amount of time away from the United States, they do have a different perspective where they have a kind of greater understanding of like international politics and they kind of bring that with them to the United States and don't always, see or get kind of like what people are saying or what's taught in schools when it's like, here's the way it is. And they kind of, I feel like that sometimes helps. I think that's also a great thing. Like I think I respect that because it adds a wider kind of lens to view politics within the lens of like stuff happens in other countries in a different way. History happens, you know, differently. People have different values and different communities abroad that impacts the way things work, as well as just so many other things. So that's just a really good, I think, perspective, but sometimes it makes it harder, to talk, I guess, with your peers, I guess, about that and relate that to them when they don't necessarily understand that perspective or they think you're just trying to be like difficult or bring something else up that they haven't thought of that they might necessarily have heard. So kind of bridging that on to the next question on here. Would you say it has been pretty easy to find and build community with people with kind of similar experiences to yours?
Um, I think it's actually been like relatively easy trying to find people with similar experiences somewhat because where I live in New Jersey, there's like a huge second generation population, especially in my age group. And I'm gonna go back on something I said before. I actually think I live in a where I go to school, it's a very privileged, like very white area, but in the region I live in, it's very diverse. So I think even if I don't need to find people who have the exact same experiences as me, some of the like the feelings that we were feeling and and like different sentiments and ideas are very similar. And I think it's easy to find like community and like build relationships on based on that, even if like some of the experiences and the backgrounds that you have may be completely different.
I'll say finding my people and building those relationships has been, at first it wasn't easy, I'll say, because, I used to be shy and it used to be hard for me to go outside of my comfort zone and talking to people. But now I'm just like, hey, are you African by any chance? Are you an international student? Are you a second generation? And we can go from there. We can talk about Afrobeat, Burna Boy, anything. And it's been so far very easy, I'll say. And by building those connections, I also try to help, the ones who just came in and who are in the shoes I used to be in the past. So
I have quite a bit of a different experience in this because of the community that I'm in. Like there are people who have been here for many generations, like even if they are Hispanic, or people that are like been here forever, and they're like super duper white and like, more southern at this point. So it's kind of hard for me to find people who are second generation Mexican American, and I know I could find them outside, but it's just kind of more difficult to do that when you're kind of settled in an area.
Yeah, once again, there's such a wide range of perspectives that you're bringing to this kind of from like your own area. And I think geography does kind of matter a lot as well as the people you surround yourself with. And if they're kind of able to make like that bridge and connection. For me personally, like I said, I feel like it wasn't as easy for me to make like a connection based off of like a shared experience of anyone because my background was, I think, not as well represented where I was, even though there was like a lot of like diversity. So I kind of just learned to connect with people, I think, through kind of bridging the gap a little bit or through kind of learning about their experiences and kind of integrating like cultures and make that's so cool, like what do you do at home? You're bilingual, like that's so like awesome. Like you're just so like great, that you have these experiences. Here's how I am as well. I want to learn. I feel like just that link is also been very positive and strong for me there. So kind of moving on from that to the idea of kind of understanding. What is something you wish people from non-immigrant backgrounds understood?
I guess I'll say immigrants are very important. They're like the base of this country, I'll say. And having more culture, more people from different backgrounds shouldn't be something people should be scared of. And you cannot resume or you cannot generalize only one group of people with the same. You cannot have only one label for one group of people because where I'm from defines a lot of things about me, but it doesn't define everything about me. Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of jump off of that, like I think, all immigrants bring like immense value to like the US specifically. And that like we are a little bit or a lot more than like what is given out in the media or what is shared through, politics or movies and things like that. Like we are our own people, we're our own person, we're our own community. Yeah.
I feel the kind of same thing, like the way like with my mom and dad meeting, like it was so cool them talking about being like they met on boats and stuff. And they talked about how there were so many different people from different kind of cultures and communities, how they kind of find, a lot of times there were boats from the same countries, but crew members would come from like all over, and how people kind of just got together and it wasn't necessarily like where they're from that defined them, but it did kind of add to like this really strong connection. And I couldn't imagine like the world without like my dad talking about like South Africa or having like the accent and being able to connect with other people from like all across the world. And I think that there is almost like a kind of privilege I feel and honor of being connected to like a global community and knowing that there's something like bigger outside of myself or like a singular like hometown or root that's out there that kind of has taught me like it's really great to go out and explore and like find your own identity, but there's other people who are on the same journey with you and that people who may not necessarily like fit in or stand out like from where they're from, like it's just a great opportunity to kind of connect and just learn from each other.
For me, it's definitely the family aspect of it. Like, I have a very large, like, proud, happy family, and we get to, be very close knit, and meet up and be big, and it's just so much more fun when we have people that we know, people that we love, and we are ourselves, like just being ourselves, and just getting to live life how we want to and how we want to together.
I'll say the community aspect of it, because I have my family, but I feel like my community is also my family, because I'll just, go to the store, speak French, my African language, and then I'll be like, I'll just, talk to them, and then we just eat it off. And, they'll be like, oh, you should try this, you should do this. And they start giving me advices and, act like I'm not their child, but like a part of their community and their circle. So like wherever I go, I know the people from my country, they got me, the people from my culture, they also got me. And the food also, the food is a very important part that I really like, and the history behind what made my country and my people the way they are.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Thanks for kind of once again, it's just very beautiful to have you all in here. Just have so much diversity and different heritage. Just once again, being so kind of honest and having this, taking the time to have this space. So, going out to kind of words of advice for our audience, what is one piece of advice you would give to other young people who are kind of having this experience being first or second generation Americans?
I'll say stay true to yourself. Don't be scared to go in places where sometimes you feel like they might not have a seat for you. If they don't have a seat for you, bring a chair and fold it. Bring whatever you can sit on the ground. But like don't be scared to be in those spaces and don't be scared to speak your truth and follow your dreams.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think like it's okay to be you, like you shouldn't go through life hiding who you are or being afraid of your culture or being ashamed of your culture. Like live how you want to live and experience things how you want to experience them, and don't force anybody to make you, or don't let anybody force you to conform.
Thank you so much for those words of advice. And just to catch up, Serena, on this, we're going on to the last two questions of our discussion to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, I just wish that people understood that like having a values and a view that is like non like American and that's not like homogenous with what is accepted is all right. It doesn't mean that like it doesn't mean that they're like a threat to anything that you necessarily believe in, and that having like learning about other views and other values and having and even having them might be a good thing.
And going from that to kind of helping other people understand what's something that you love about your own heritage.
I think I love like the care and the like the love that is like imbued into like every part of it. Especially like in food, in dance, because I do Indian dance, and I think that's a very important part of myself. I think that there's a lot of ways to express myself in my culture, and I really love that part about it.
That's so cool. How long have you been dancing?
About 3 years.
Awesome. And then what is one piece of advice you would give to other young people who are first or second generation Americans?
I would say that like if you're feeling a little lost about um how to feel connected to your culture, I think it's something that you need to seek out for yourself. It's not always something that like might be given to you or that your parents might show to you. It might be something that you need to like figure out with like the community around you or just like looking to other resources. It might be like more of a personal journey.
Hmm. That wraps up kind of all the questions for the discussion today. Just want to thank you all so much for being here. And is there any kind of final things you'd like to say?
I just want to say thank you for having me here today, and thank you for giving me a space to share my experience and my story. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to listening to this episode.
I'm so glad to hear your story, and thank you so much for bringing it.
Yeah, I think these podcasts are like very valuable to like the experiences of not just like one people or another, but everyone that like makes up a community.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for like showing the different experiences of people like from such different backgrounds. I think that there's a lot of like similarities to be had in all of them and a lot of differences and in those differences like you find a lot of valuable things. So I want to thank you for like sharing that with everyone in the world because I think it's something that deserves to be shared and deserves to be known.
Thank you all so much for being so positive and being so honest and opening yourself up to share your story. I just think this episode really does kind of reaffirm just there's so much value and so many great things to learn and know about like the first and second generation experience, and no one is the same.